Okay, thank you, Andrew. Mr. Chairperson, thank you, and to all of your assembled guests. I'd just like to say to begin with, it seems like an entire lifetime since we assembled, or I was present at St. Peter's Church Hall to deliver a presentation to you. It's wonderful that we're able to continue to communicate with you through these virtual techniques. It's not quite the same as being together, but as your chair clearly identified, both Jim and I would be delighted to take questions and answers from you at the end. There's an enormous amount of information contained within the scheme. We can't possibly update you on everything, so we have endeavoured to pull together 2 presentations to come together back to back this evening to give you a flavour of where you're at, a journey for those of you who are both knowledgeable in the project and those of you who have no knowledge of the project. Hopefully you'll all be able to follow the information we're delivering this evening. But obviously if there's a specific question that you have, please just hold it and address it to us at the end, and we'll do our best to answer the question. So hopefully you're able to see the slides that I've put up on the screen. I'm just going to bring you through my slides. And in relation to this evening, first of all, just to highlight that we've broken down this evening's presentation to you into 3 broad themes. Firstly, I will be providing you with an update on the scheme, on progress. I'm not going to mention it again this evening, but you can see on that visual an image of the Flood Risk Management Act 2009, which is the legislation under which we are delivering or advancing flood protection schemes. Secondly, I'll give you an update or an insight into the preferred scheme as it was approved. And then we're going to move on to providing you with insight and updates on the scheme's design and evolution. In relation to transition, I'll cover the first and the second part, and Jim will cover the second part in more detail, and then onwards into the third part. Thereafter, and as discussed, we can break for questions and answers and our discussion forum as appropriate. So first of all, in relation to scheme progress, I wanted to begin the journey tonight by reflecting back to what I said to you in January 2019. In relation to that evening, which you've already been reminded of, the presentation that night was broken into 2 parts. The first part was delivered by Gail Donald of SEPA, who turned up to provide you with an overview of flood risk management in Scotland and local flood risk management plans, flood mapping, and the Scottish Government's approach to taking forward flood protection schemes. Thereafter, I delivered the second part of that evening's event, providing you with an understanding of what a flood protection scheme is, how one was being set up for Musselburgh, and what the next steps would be in setting up such a flood protection scheme. In relation to that event, I would just like to highlight that the slide deck from that event, as I recall, was made available to your organization back in 2019. If you don't have it, or if you have lost it, so to speak, we'd be delighted to provide it to you once more. And I would like to suggest that for all of you, it provides a very good snapshot into the early stages of a flood protection scheme. Tonight, we're doing our best not to recover that ground, but back to back, they provide you with a really good journey on how we've traveled from the beginning through to today. Just moving a little forward, I wanted to just again reflect back to that last event that we met. This is one of the slides from that presentation. Within it, towards the end of the presentation, I finished with what were the next steps. Final determination of the hydrology, developing of the hydraulic model and the development of its flood maps, advancing the ecological surveys, analysing new information, geotechnical, structural, environmental, topographic, stakeholder, develop a long list of options, formal consultation with stakeholders and the people of Musselburgh, and development of the preferred scheme. Tonight, firstmost, I would just like to say to you that all of those tasks are complete at this point. I also referenced to you that, and this was January 2019, that as we traveled through 2019, we would have 2 major public consultation exercises in the town. The first was intended for February 2019, took place in February 2019, and put out a call for information from the town. We then had a public exhibition, which ended up taking place at the end of July, not May, over 2 days, 3 days in the Brunton Theatre, 2 days of public engagement and 1 day of private meetings with key stakeholders. And again, that was completed. And thereafter, we concluded the options appraisal process. So once again, all completed as we evolved the scheme. Just ranging across some high-level major activities which have been progressed over that period. And the scheme's hydrology has been developed. By hydrology, we mean the science through which the water drops out of the sky, and we quantify it so that we know the volume of water that we're talking about. We undertook a climate change assessment, and this was complex because the UK government at Westminster released a new data set in the autumn of 2019. That was a major step forward for climate change assessment. We needed to absorb all of that data and to make an assessment of how to incorporate it into our project, which we completed. We developed a hydraulic model. The hydraulic model exists within our computer systems, and it is the tool through which we can map and model the flood maps, the flood water, and therefore produce flood maps of the extent of flooding within the town. The outputs from our early stage model were presented through the public exhibition to the town back in July of 2019. We have been undertaking many surveys. I referenced quite a few of them in the earlier point, and many of you, or all of you, should have seen the survey work that was undertaken across the town last year. In particular, you should have been aware of the ground investigation, the borehole rigs which were extracting ground samples from across the town. We've been undertaking a significant piece of environmental work, and apologies for the acronyms contained within this bullet point. I couldn't fit in all of the points otherwise, but the EIA stands for our Environmental Impact Assessment, and that has now formally concluded. Leading up to its formal commencement, we required to undertake a vast range of ecological surveys to capture baseline ecology data across the town. We undertook a PEA, which stands for a Preliminary Environmental Assessment, and we then undertook a formal environmental screening and environmental scoping exercise, the outcome of which is the structure provided to us through which we develop our environmental impact assessment to determine any potential environmental impact from our scheme, and then if appropriate, to undertake appropriate measures to mitigate. We set up and commenced our stakeholder working groups. These are with key stakeholders, statutory stakeholders, those with responsibilities under regulatory and legislative frameworks who work on your behalf as arms of the state. They held many meetings through the options appraisal process, and those working groups remain in place and will be a forum through which we will evolve the outline design as it progresses. We've undertaken numerous public engagements in the town. Our two major events, which I previously highlighted, are showcases to date, were the call for information and the public exhibition #1. And in due course, we will have other major formal public engagements. But there was also many other one-to-one meetings and community and group meetings and presentations to groups such as yourselves that have taken place over the duration and will continue to do so. And I will talk about the challenges of communication later on in this presentation. We then undertook our formal comprehensive option appraisal process to look at all of the different ways, options, through which flood risk in the town could be reduced. And coming out of that process, we determined our preferred scheme. The preferred scheme being the deemed best combination of those options to reduce the flood risk to the town. Just changing approach slightly for a minute, I wanted to just walk you through the sort of pathway through the progression of a flood protection scheme as key points. Now, some of you will have seen this before, and indeed, the only thing that has substantially changed on this timeline is the where we are on it, so we have moved substantially down the timeline. But to begin with, we need to define the problem. We need to gather huge amounts of information, work out all of the options, then determine the best approach, which is our option appraisal process, consult with many, many parties to determine what they think of our thoughts and our approach to mitigating the risk, bring all of this together to determine the preferred scheme, which has concluded, and thereafter we need to undertake an outline design of that preferred scheme to confirm that it's viable and or technically feasible, and to allow it to evolve, because evolve it will through that design process. And then at an appropriate point in time through the evolution of that outline design, we need to re-engage with all of our key stakeholders and the people of the town before once again making an engineering judgment to bring it together so that we can deem the best approach to flood protection for the town, which we then take forward to formal approval to get the scheme approved. And only once the scheme is approved do we cascade into the detailed design, preparing construction drawings, developing a tender, such that we can take forward the project to work and therefore begin construction. So it's a long journey. There's a lot of steps on it. There's no point pretending it's easy nor quick, but at the same point, we're making continual systematic progress through that pathway and will continue so doing. Which leads me on to the preferred scheme. So the preferred scheme is a key stage on our journey as we move forward. It's not the final product, it's simply a step on that journey. But it allows us at a moment in time to crystallize our thinking pertaining to where we're at, to put it down in words and form, and to take that forward for formal approval. Now that formal approval was achieved through a East Lothian Council Cabinet meeting on the 21st of January 2020. And Cabinet approved the preferred scheme at that point in time. And within that report, we made key recommendations as to what they were approving and to clearly define what it was that we would then do to move this forward. I think it's worth just highlighting a point that has been raised to me on a number of occasions by the town's councillors, and that is a feeling of disappointment by some within the town that that report was taken to Cabinet and not to Council, because not all councillors are in the Cabinet, and most of the town's councillors did not get an opportunity to participate in that decision making. The town's councillors were part of the public exhibition and the engagement, but it is clear that they were not part of that Cabinet meeting if they were not on the Cabinet. So within that report, we changed the journey process, and we now have clear instruction that the next time that we need to get approval from within the council, we will be going to council itself and no longer to Cabinet. But for that meeting, I was bound by a previous requirement or obligation to go back to Cabinet, and I couldn't jump across parallel pathways to Council. It's slightly complex, but just to highlight that we have corrected that historic error, and that will not be happening again further to clear request from the town's councillors. So in relation to the preferred scheme, I'm sincerely hoping that everybody here tonight has seen this graphic. It was on the front page of the town's paper. It was available through many channels, and if you don't have it, we can clearly provide it to you. But we produced two graphics to encapsulate the essence of the preferred scheme in a visual forum. And this just shows the different things that will happen. The black lines are the line of defences. The bullet points are clearly identifying interventions that will take place. And this particular graphic is sort of at the higher catchment scale. I'll drill into a closer up of the town in a minute, but within this particular graphic, it clearly identifies potential natural flood management measures in the catchment, that they are still within the scope of the scheme and we're still looking at them. And furthermore, possible modification of the Scottish water reservoirs in the southwest catchment at Rosebery and Edgelow, and a possible engineered debris catcher along the Esk between the A1 and the meeting of the two waters, the north and the south Esk. So upstream interventions to reduce the flow of water to the town, as well as interventions in the town itself. So just moving forward, a couple of bullet points on the scheme, but just to clearly highlight to you that the point of the scheme is to reduce flood risk. And we set out with an aspiration to reduce flood risk against the 0.5% AEP flood event, which is also known as the 1 in 200 year event, and to include with this an allowance for future climate change, which we now understand to be a risk that is coming towards us as the years passed. Within the preferred scheme, we were able to confirm that that is indeed the level of protection that we will be able to provide by these combination of measures. So from my perspective, that's a huge success. It was possible that we would not ever be able to deliver a scheme delivering that level of flood protection if the structures became too high to become unacceptable to the town, but we're not in that situation. And so the scheme itself is a combination of new flood defences along the river corridor and along the coast, protecting against both the Esk and the Firth of Forth. The replacement of 3 bridges with new bridges, because those bridges provide a hydraulic constraint, they throttle the water, and they cause the water to rise higher. So to replace them with clear span structures, which will provide less of an impediment to flow. The provision of draining and pumping stations across the town to remove groundwater, secondary flooding, and or to ensure that we don't create a problem by severing connection between the town and its water courses. Management measures on the Mill Lade and the Pinky Burn to manage flood risk from those water courses. And as articulated a minute ago to you, catchment management through reservoir adaptation and catchment management through natural flood management and tree management within the catchment, the details of which needed to be confirmed at that point in time. Within the town itself, there's greater detail in this slide. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. I realize that Jim is going to speak to you a little more about the preferred scheme tonight, but you can see as you zoom in that there's clear dots to identify the bridges. And just one of the key things to highlight to you, that within the preferred scheme, we made an absolute decision to have no impact on the Rennie and the Roman bridges, which are two historic structures, part of the town, grade listed structures, and we got clear sight from Historic Environment Scotland that they would like us to leave them alone. And so we've confirmed the capability of so doing. I know I put this slide up previously, and certainly I put it up a year ago at the Community Council meeting, but I think it's essential I put it back up again. The questions that always come to me is, that's wonderful, you've given us loads of detail, but that doesn't tell me what it will look like, how I will be able to access the outside from the inside, the beach, the river, and how we're going to construct it. And so just to reiterate, the reason we haven't told you is because we don't know. The reason we don't know is because the outline design isn't done. The outline design will be done in consultation with the people of the town, and only then will we know the answers to these questions. So why is the outline design not developed? We intended to develop it from March of last year. And in March of last year, something else happened, which I think has dominated all of our lives over the period since then. COVID-19 came and scuppered our plans. It reduced us or removed us to home working, to virtual meetings, to pondering how we continue to consult with the town to deliver our scheme, and left us in a very difficult situation. We have been constantly trying to evolve and deal with that situation in a working environment, just as we have in a personal sense, just as all of you have as well. But it has substantially challenged us over the period. And so I would like to turn my attention now to discussion of consultation and how we develop the bespoke flood protection scheme we have promised for the town with these challenges. So I want to reiterate that the project team and thereby the council has committed to developing a flood protection scheme through a consultative process with key stakeholders and the people of Musselburgh. COVID-19 removed our ability to so do last March. Therefore, the project team moved to rearrange the project's programme. We stopped the delivery of the outline design last March, April, and instead we restructured our programme to undertake substantial amounts of survey work and other technical details in the background which were necessary for the development of the project, but which did not link to the actual evolution of the outline design, which we wanted to do in consultation with stakeholders and the public. We proceeded to undertake that survey work at risk. We didn't know if we would or would not be able to deliver within the town through the summer, depending on how COVID played out. And I'm delighted to tell you that the survey program last summer was 100% successful, and we achieved everything we hoped we would achieve, and we did so safely without impact to our workforce deriving from COVID. But by the autumn, it became increasingly clear to us that COVID wasn't going away, and that there would not be an immediate return to normal or potentially no return to normal. So under the management of the Scottish Government and our project board, we moved to put in place a new strategic communications plan and to develop a suite of new communication tools through which we could manage consultation moving forward. Just to cite you on those new communications tools, which are currently in development and on the verge of dropping into place. We have a new standalone website, which will replace the pages that we currently have at the East Lothian Council website. Now that website's in place. If you search that URL today, you will get there. It will probably simply give you an under construction tab or message and send you back to the council's pages. but behind the scenes, there are graphic designers developing pages for that website, and that website is hoping to go live in the early summer. As soon as it is live, we will send out communication to let everyone in the town know. In parallel, we're developing a new scheme newsletter. This is intended to be A4 sized, 6-page, and is going to be sent out on a quarterly basis so that we can communicate with all of those who don't have access to the internet. It's intended that we will send out those newsletters by a Royal Mail postal drop to everyone in the EH21 postcode to keep everyone up to date on what's happening with the project. We're developing an interactive digital hub through which we can have interactive forums for engagement in relation to design. It's still our absolute aspiration that we'll be able to return to the Brunton to hold our public exhibition and our key public consultation events in person in the hall, but if we're not, this alternative digital tool will allow us to do it in a digital forum. And we're bringing in a new stakeholder manager to augment the project team so we can expand our capability to consult with the town. And so just bringing my slides to a close, I just wanted to reiterate the key points from me to you as the project manager tasked with responsibility from East Lothian Council to take this forward. The outline design was not commenced because we promised to do it in consultation, but it is now commencing, and the meetings with the working groups have once again opened up. We presented to the Community Council 2 weeks ago. We presented to Fisher Harbour and Seafront Association last week, and tonight we're presenting to you. Next week, we'll be putting out a press release updating the town on all of this, and then we'll be following on with the website and communication tools as discussed. Because these things are all dropping into place, we're now ready to begin the outline design once more, and so it has commenced. It will be evolved through that consultation process as promised, and together through that process, we aspire to and will deliver a bespoke flood protection scheme for Musselburgh. Now, I'm going to take down my presentation and hand over to Jim, who's going to give you more insight into the evolution of the design and the technical content of progress that we've made over the duration.
Thank you, Conor. Just a second, once you take down your page, I'll be able to share my screen.
So have I oh, sorry, I pressed pause as opposed to stop share.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Just give me a second.
Okay, so hopefully you're able to see my screen now. So just to reiterate a couple of things that Conor has already touched on there. In terms of the preferred scheme, we've now established that we are able to protect the town from the 0.5% AEP plus climate change event. So just to explain what that is in a more sort of straightforward manner, AEP stands for annual exceedance probability. So it is equivalent to what in the past you might have heard called the 1 in 200 year event, but in some respects that can be quite confusing as to what it actually means. So the 1 in 200 year event might be understood to be something that would happen once in 100 and 200 years, which is not correct. In effect, what we're saying is that in any given year during the next 100 years, there's a 0.5% chance of it happening in any particular year. So it's not to say that it's a once in 200 year event. So where are we with that standard of protection? Well, essentially we're progressing a design now informed by the hydrology and the hydraulic modelling that Conor alluded to earlier. So the hydrology is the scientific analysis part of it, where we look at historic data and topography. We then build a computer model and we carry out hydraulic modelling of various different scenarios. So you can see on the screen here, this is an example of one particular scenario, which is a flood resulting from flooding on the River Esk. So the river flooding and also coastal flooding, we're now able to incorporate that latest climate change data, which is based on the UK CP18 data, which is published by the Met Office, and we receive guidance from SEPA on how to take that guidance forward. So what we're having to deal with here are actually a number of different flood events. So Potentially the town could be at risk of flooding from the River Esk bursting its bank, which is likely to result from a storm coming from the southwest, dropping rain on the catchment, which then runs into the river and then flows northwards into the town and bursts its banks, and that's what you see on screen. But equally, Musselburgh has to deal with being a coastal town, and equally we could have a storm and a high tide and a prevailing wind coming from the northeast. So an entirely different event could cause a different kind of flooding along the coastal stretch of the town. So we've taken a holistic approach and looked at all the different locations and defences that would be required for different storms arriving from different locations. So the preferred scheme that Conor mentioned that we now have and that we're taking forward relies on a number of different aspects. First and foremost, under any circumstance in any storm, we still require direct defences in the town. And by direct defences, I mean either flood walls or flood embankments or floodgates, essentially a barrier in town along the sides of the river to contain the river during a flood event. We then need to supplement that with drainage and pumping stations to take account of the fact that during a storm there's still going to be rain landing on the protected side of the defences, and in that scenario that water could begin to accumulate in pond and low-lying areas and is not able to drain away into the river because the river is still higher and contained by the walls. So those pumping stations would then be designed to collect that water, which is normally taken away by the road drainage, and then pumped into the river against the water pressure of the river. On top of this, we're then looking at attenuation, which is storing flood water upstream such that we can then control the peak of the storm and reduce the flow of water travelling down the river at the highest and most severe point in the storm. And the solution that we're developing with that is to utilise a couple of existing reservoirs in the catchment at Rosebery and Edgelow, and I'll show you those shortly. And the last aspect that we're incorporating is debris management, recognising that there are a number of bridges in the town, and those are all susceptible to damage or blockage by trees and other large debris, so we need to take account of that. So in terms of the sort of key locations within the town, the direct stretch of direct defences that we're looking at, if we start at the upstream end, which is the south end of the town, you can see there at the Esk Mills Weir and at the Mill Lade, essentially we're starting at the field, which is locally known as the Giant Hogweed Field, crossing across there, tying into high ground, but then following down the right-hand bank of the Esk around Station Road towards Olive Bank Bridge. Downstream of Olive Bank Bridge, we then require defences on both sides of the river. So they would tie into high ground on Esk side west and at the car park at Mall Avenue. And we then have defences down both sides of the river, tying into each of the bridges. So that's around the sides of the Roman Bridge, then the Rennie Bridge, the Short Hope Street footbridge, the Electric Bridge, the Goose Green Bridge, which I haven't managed to put in a label for there, and all the way down to the mouth of the Esk. On the right bank, the defences would then tie into the existing sea wall that go round about the lagoons, and on the left bank we would then wrap around the coast towards the west, around Fisher Row Links and the promenade, around the back of Fisher Row Harbour and along the back sands and beach, tying into high ground at Brunstein Burn, which is the boundary with City of Edinburgh Council. So just to give you an understanding of direct defences, and I mentioned that those are either flood walls or flood embankments, we're looking at 5.5 kilometres worth of these direct defences in Musselburgh. Now, as Conor mentioned earlier, we don't know what those are going to look like yet. We don't know the nature of those. What we have started to define is the position of those flood defences and how high they would have to be to contain the flood water. I'm just giving you an example here of different types of flood walls that you can see, and these are projects that I've worked on. So on the left-hand side is the White Cart Water Flood Prevention Scheme on the south side of Glasgow. That's just round the corner from Hampden Football Park. And on the right-hand side, we've got Hoyk Flood Protection Scheme that Conor and I also worked on and is currently under construction in the Scottish borders. So you can see that there are very different kinds of treatments depending on the location. So we have a formed concrete finish on the left-hand side, and then in more sensitive areas on the right-hand side, you can see stone cladding. It's still a concrete core to that wall, but it's also clad in stone to then make it tie in and blend in with the surrounding environment. So you might expect it in Musselburgh within the conservation area to require a higher finish or appearance to the flood walls than you might expect to see along the coastal stretch, for example, or around the Eskimos industrial area. So we'd expect to see, once we've consulted with all the relevant people, expect to see different types of finishes in different areas. So just moving on from the direct defences, a key part of this is utilising two existing reservoirs in the catchment to the south of the town. I mentioned those at Rosebery and Edgelaw. So these reservoirs are classic example of Victorian architecture and engineering, and they were used to supplement the flow of water into the river during the Industrial Revolution when the mills needed the river to be topped up to a higher level to operate and to power the mills. Nowadays, those reservoirs sit there full of water, but they aren't actually used for anything. So they don't provide a water supply to the town. They're not drinking water. They're just essentially a legacy of the industrial age gone past. So what we're looking at here is to modify those existing reservoirs to create a storage potential. So if we were to reduce the normal water level, you can see there the reservoir is full in the photograph. If we reduce that normal operating water level, it then creates a storage volume between there and the top of the dam, such that when a storm does occur, the water is then stored in there and we can release it in a controlled manner, such that the maximum flow in the river passing down through the town is less than if we just had those reservoirs full at the beginning of the storm. So this picture here shows the spillway and the overflow weir next to the crest of the dam. And this photograph is the step spillway downstream of the previous photograph. So the water spills over the weir and then discharges downstream, and eventually that water leads into the Esk. So the modifications that we're proposing to make there would be to create effectively a new bypass structure at a lower level than the existing weir. So that would allow us to lower that water level without making any significant changes to the existing structure. So we can leave the existing weir as it is. We then have a buried pipe that you can see in the bottom of the photograph, the bottom of the sketch there, which basically conveys the water from the new bypass structure and then discharges it into that step spillway that you saw in the last photograph. So that's a fairly benign and passive form of control. It doesn't require someone to be on site to operate it. It doesn't require moving machinery or power supplies, etc. It's purely down to the geometry and the level of the structure that controls the flow in the reservoir. So moving on from there, I previously spoke about debris management. So we're also looking at providing a debris trap at White Craigs. So the photograph on the right here shows you the River Esk passing under the A1 bridge, and the section of field to the left and the trees is actually in the northeast corner of the Dalkeith Country Park estate. So what we're looking at here is providing a trap or a debris catcher across the river, so that in the event of a storm, when you'd expect perhaps trees to be washed away and debris to be washed downstream, rather than allowing that material to be washed down into the town and then trapped underneath the bridges, we'd intercept that at a safer location upstream of the town. So the debris trap there would still allow smaller debris and allow flow and allow fish passage during the normal operation of the river, but it would trap those larger logs and trees, and they could then be removed safely after the peak of the storm. So that's a key aspect, I suppose, to the holistic design of the scheme, that we're not just relying on flood walls and embankments in town. We're looking at a three-pronged approach there, so that we have defences in town, but by incorporating debris management and reservoir attenuation, we can reduce the peak of the storm and therefore reduce the flow into the town, and we can reduce the likelihood of blockage underneath the bridges. And the big benefit of that is that the defences otherwise would have to be higher in town. But by incorporating these other aspects to the design, we can reduce the height of the defences that would be in town. So those are the main aspects in terms of river engineering and flood risk management, but we recognise that a project of this scale is obviously life-changing for the town, and as such, and given the scale of it, it presents other opportunities. So beyond just flood risk management, we're engaging with stakeholders and other projects that are happening in the town and other parts of the council to see what multiple benefits we can deliver as part of the scheme. And one of those, which I don't know whether that was mentioned at the previous meeting in 2019, but one of the other main multiple benefits we're considering is active travel. So if I move on to the next slide. So active travel is really looking at different modes of transport in the town, and given that we're going to be working along the river and working along the coast and having to dig up the ground to put in the foundations of the flood walls, it then makes sense to consider, well, when we reinstate the river banks and we reinstate the paths and the roads, etc., can we put something back which is more than what was there before, rather than just replacing tarmac for tarmac's sake? Can we do something smarter and more usable for the town and add value to the town while we're putting in the flood defences? So you can see there we're looking at different types of users and different types of journeys that people might make, whether they're going out for a walk or whether they're cycling, or different types of users, but essentially people who are not in cars and vans and lorries. So potentially we could be looking at a coastal promenade parallel to the coastal defences, which would be an amenity asset to the town, people taking family out, going for a leisurely cycle, walking the dog, pushing the buggy, etc., that we could incorporate that along the coast. Equally along the riverside, we could be looking at people, going from their home in one part of the town to their work in the high street, or travelling to the train station, either they're commuting into Edinburgh, or students coming from the university down into town. So there are different types of journeys and different locations that people want to get to. So we're looking at, can we connect up these key locations around the town while we're going in there and while they're doing the work, rather than we just focus on flood protection and then another 5 years after, someone else comes in and decides to deliver another project and then has to start digging the town up all over again. So in terms of the coastal active travel, these are all concepts at the moment which we obviously have to verify and discuss with stakeholders and engage with the public. But opportunities that we could consider would be something like shown here, where we create a cycle route along the coast, where we have a more established promenade along the fact that we're already building the coastal flood defences, gives us this opportunity to put something more established and a smarter solution in place. So Conor mentioned that obviously COVID-19 changed everything for us, and we had been planning to have done a lot of that engagement with the public, people like yourselves, last year, to have developed more definite solutions and exactly what the defences and other aspects of the project were going to look like. So what we've tried to do instead is, I guess, work with the restrictions that are in place, and we've redesigned effectively our programme to focus last year more on data collection to inform the engineering design, such that we can then focus this year on the public engagement and the stakeholder engagement to then put the meat on the bones, so to speak. So last year we carried out fairly significant ground investigation contracts. There were something in the region of 40 boreholes which were sunk around the town to give us a detailed understanding of the ground conditions as they change round about the town, that are key to understanding buried extents of the structures that would be required. So if you think about flood defences, something akin to an iceberg, that for everything that you see above the ground, there is a much more significant foundation to it below the ground that you can't see, and that's highly dependent on the types of soils that we have underneath the ground. So we've gathered all of that information that we now need. On top of that, we wanted to understand the lay of the land. We already had detailed information about the river itself in order to carry out the hydraulic modelling that I mentioned, but the topographic survey that we carried out last summer is far more widespread, that considers the wider town. So we now have a detailed survey and a ground model of all of the ground levels around the town that allow us to then influence the design, the outline design that we carry out. Now, we recognise that a scheme of this scale is obviously going to interact and have an impact on its surrounding environment. And Conor mentioned the EIA, or the Environmental Impact Assessment, which we're carrying out. But to inform that assessment, we carry out ecology surveys. So we're looking at carrying out gaining information about birds, about mammals in the river, about trees and the different varieties and the condition of those, bird nesting in trees, bat roosting potential, etc. So all of that information we've been able to carry out under strict protocols, even during the coronavirus restrictions, and to some extent actually doing it when the town was quieter was advantageous to it. So it was easier to carry it out without disturbing other people under normal conditions. The other surveys that we've carried out, we had a number of weirs in the town, so focusing specifically on the Esk Mills weir at the Esk Mills area, and the Goose Green weir down towards the mouth of the Esk. So we've carried out structural inspections of those and a topographic survey of those as well, to understand their current condition and if any works, maintenance works or modification needs to be carried out. Invasive non-native species is also something that is quite a common occurrence when you're working in a river environment, and we surveyed the town and we're aware of the giant hogweed field at the upstream limits of the scheme. And over the past couple of years, I guess, there's been a significant effort to treat that invasive species in that field, to the extent that now if you walk through there, you don't actually see giant hogweed anymore. So it's not, we're not saying by any means that the problem has disappeared, but we're aware of it, and we're treating it aggressively, and that's something that will be part of the scheme as well. Adjacent to that field is the Mill Lade at the upstream end. So the weir that I mentioned was constructed in order to direct flow into Mill Lade, which then fed water to the mills. So part of that Mill Lade is still open around the back of Esk Mills, and that section was previously inundated with the invasive species, and really just with a build-up of silt and debris and trash over the years and over the decades. So we had to understand the condition of that channel, and the dimensions, etc. So we carried out some clearance works to remove the debris and the invasive species, etc. And there's better access into that Mill Lade there. The EIA that I mentioned, we've carried out now the baseline assessment. So while we still need to complete the assessment of the outline design, which will be informed by consultation, we've now completed the baseline assessment to understand the current condition of the town. And we'll then compare the baseline with the impact of the scheme to be constructed, and that allows us to then report on the potential impact of constructing the scheme, and then provide or present options for mitigation. And we've tried our best under fairly difficult circumstances last year to engage with statutory stakeholders. While it might have been challenging to engage with individual members of the public, those that work in organisations like SEPA or Nature Scot or Historic Environment Scotland, we've still been able to engage with them in a virtual environment like this evening, so we've still been working with them. So that's where we've got to so far. In terms of our next steps looking forward into 2021 and beyond, We obviously need to progress the detail in the outline design and understand more what that is going to look like, and understand whether people are agreeable to what we're proposing. We're going to continue to engage with those statutory consultees through working groups, whether that's in a virtual environment or in person. So they'll be based on different themes. So there'll be one working group focusing on roads and structures. There'll be another one focusing on the coastal and watercourse impact. There'll be others focusing on public utilities, etc. And a key aspect, I suppose, is the enhanced landscape design. Again, we've talked about the opportunities that come with developing and constructing linear infrastructure, such as a flood scheme. And we understand that there's a potential to augment and put something back which is smarter and better and more appropriate for the town. So we're looking at where we want to focus our landscape design efforts, either along the coast or along the river. And that'll form a main part of the outline design. The culmination of that will then be to present that outline design to a public exhibition. And that's basically giving the public an opportunity to then feedback as to whether they think we're on the right track, or if there's anything else that we haven't considered, or anything that we need to tweak or change. Once we then gain that information, we can then revise or make changes to the scheme. And then at the conclusion of that, we'd then publish the scheme as part of the statutory process. And then, as Conor has mentioned, at that point, we'd hope that the scheme would be confirmed through the Flood Risk Management Act, and that would then give the council the legal powers to then carry the scheme forward and to then have the confidence to carry out the detailed design. So that gives you a fairly whistle-stop tour of where we are with the outline design. That concludes all of the slides. So thank you for taking the time to listen to Conor and I this evening. And at this point, I would invite any questions that you might have. Andrew, over to you as to how you want to handle the questions, or Alan.
Are we unmuted, are we? Right.
Well, I can hear you, Alan, yes.
People will have to unmute themselves. I can't do it centrally. So if you just indicate who you'd like to ask a question, then that person can kindly unmute themselves and fire ahead.
Well, anyway, I would like to ask the first question, which is probably a very obvious one. Who are the stakeholders?
Conor, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a reasonable and fair question, and in a sense, stakeholder constitutes a catch-all term. So first of all, we have regulatory or statutory stakeholders, which we often refer to as statutory stakeholders. So within that category, we have a SEPA, and SEPA have many subsections that we have to engage with. SEPA are the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. We have SNH, who now have a new name, which is Nature Scot, but SNH was Scottish National Heritage, and they now, as Nature Scotland, provide another statutory authority that we have to engage with, and they particularly have responsibility for the Firth of Forth SPA, which is the special protection area that sits out there and which has legal status. We have, of course, all of the utility organisations who are responsible for the services that are delivered to your properties and your houses: Scottish Water, Scottish Gas, or sorry, SGN as they're now referred to, Scottish Power, BT, etc. But then there are many others, such as Historic Environment Scotland, who are responsible for our grade listed structures across the town and across the country. We have the council with all of its different remits and regulatory responsibilities, the council's planning authority functions, the council's officers who are responsible for access or street lighting or roads or bridges. We may have other organisations who are responsible for public infrastructure, such as Network Rail, Amy, Bear, or Transport Scotland, who are responsible for the trunk road network. And so all of those organisations have legislative or regulatory responsibilities on behalf of the state to manage their assets, which are functions of the state and which provide a service through to you. So we have to interface with them and ensure that we manage our modifications to the town without disrupting their responsibilities to manage their, through their authority to manage their responsibilities on your behalf. But then there are also within the town the organization that constitutes the town's organizations or businesses or clubs or groups. And then there's the general population on top of all of that as well, which means the entire population of the town and or anyone else who's interested in this scheme. And that might be people who visit the town as tourists or others who pass through the town but love to come there, enjoy the beaches, enjoy the walks, and who would feel impacted by a physical change to the landscape. And all of those parties have the right to become a formal objector, to object against the scheme that we're taking forward, which of course disrupts our ability to progress a scheme, even if the vast majority of the people in the town wish it to happen. So when we say stakeholders, we mean all of those parties and everybody who has an interest in this project. And by taking this forward in a consultative approach, we are basically inviting everybody in early to evolve the design in partnership with all parties, rather than to simply design a product and to try and push it through, which we feel inevitably increases the risk of confrontation with parties who feel that something is being pushed on top of them, which they don't like and which they have had no part or input into shaping to make it unique to the town and the challenges faced by the town, which of course the people of the town know best because they're the ones who live there. So hopefully that answers the question and gives you insight into what we're thinking when we use those catch-all terms and why.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive answer too. Excuse me. Anybody else like to ask a question?
I would.
Okay.
Yep.
Jana's pad.
Right, Diana, right. I've got a particular interest in the mill lade. And although you talk about it as being other levels of water, you know, around the town, which may or may not be guided towards the mill lade, is that in process? You know, would that be somewhere where any rising waters might be diverted into? Because it runs at the bottom of my garden, and obviously my concern is I wouldn't want it flooding in my garden if it's coming from further up and then going down. I'm in Mill Hill, running alongside the river, so I'm fairly low down, you know, at the end of the mill lid.
Yep, so I can probably take this one. So, you know, we understand that the mill lade is a historic structure. It runs right through the heart of the town, and for the majority of that stretch, it's now in a culvert. So I imagine a lot of people are completely unaware that the mill lade even exists through the town. The obvious part that people might know of is up at Esk Mills, where there is a stretch that's still open channel, but even that section until very recently was very difficult to access, and was surrounded by the industrial area. So essentially in the car park area at Esk Mills, that lade then enters a culvert, and from there it runs down into town along Mall Avenue, along High Street, and then through a convoluted route ends up at Mill Hill, down towards Goose Green, and eventually discharges back out roundabout where the weir is, just before the mouth of the Esk. To make matters more complicated, there's also the Pinkie Burn. So the Pinkie Burn runs from the old hospital site, which is still to the south, but to the southeast of the town, Eden Hall. It then is in an open, it's also in a culvert at that stage. It then enters an open channel section in the grounds of Pinkie St Peter's Primary School before entering a culvert again, and then going around by the race course. And there's a point at which the Pinkie and the mill lade then combine into a single culvert before then discharging at a single point downstream. So we understand that we have to look at all of these different sources of flooding, and the one thing we're carrying out in the near future is a CCTV survey of the Pinkie and of the mill lades to understand the condition of it at the moment. For all we know, there are some sections that may have collapsed or that are filled with tree roots or that have debris in them. At the moment, we just don't know. So we have to gain access to that culvert and carry out that survey with remote equipment so that we can then carry out further modelling to understand, do we need to go in and repair sections of that culvert? Do we need any sections to be changed in any way, so that we're not in a situation where we'd expect that culvert to flood? But at the moment, we're just at the point of gaining access and removing tree roots, etc. Because you can appreciate that obviously it's a historic structure, so you know there's no one living that knows the exact condition and exact the knowledge of that historic structure.
Certainly in my garden there is an inspection point, so you can get into it or at least look into it or whatever.
Yep,
we're aware. Come down and use it.
Jim, can I come in for a second?
Sure, Conor, on you go.
Diana, could I please take you up on that offer, please? Would you mind sending an email or a communication through to us tomorrow, just so that we have? Yeah.
Hall, but I will do it again. Yeah.
Okay. Apologies. So just for clarity, I have been out to and visited Mr. Jenkins at 36. We've opened the manhole in his back garden, and we have confirmed that we're able to access through his back garden. At some point in the next month, we will be out with a specialist crew who are both going to put a camera in to begin with from the open section of pipe in the river wall down at Goose Green to see how far the camera travels. And then if it manages to go the entire distance, we don't need to go into people's back gardens. But if we run into difficulties, then we'll start going into the access chambers in back gardens and then trying to survey in both directions. We're going to continue doing that all the way through to the top of the Pinky Burn and all the way through to the top of the Mill Lade to get full understanding of what's happening. So I would be very much obliged if I could take you up on that offer. One other insight for everyone on the call, and this is partially to let you know and partially in case anyone on the call knows more than I do at this point, but we have finally managed to trace the Pinky Burn to the top corner of Edenhall Hospital. And in the last 2 weeks, we dug a big pit. I don't know if anyone has been up there, but it's secured with Harris fence panels. We found the burn, and this is where it gets interesting for me. At the very top of Edenhall Hospital, the Pinky Burn sits in a 600mm diameter vitrified clay pipe, which is an old style pipe, but is also quite a large pipe for the start of a burn, which clearly means it's not the start of the burn. Unfortunately, it's filled with tree roots, so I have a specialist piece of equipment coming out in the next few weeks to remove the tree roots from within the pipe so that we can continue feeding the camera onwards to see where it goes. For me, the million-dollar question is, does it go under the railway or not? If anyone knows the answer to that conundrum, I'd be delighted if you could contact me and assist me in understanding the what happens. Alistair, is your hand up? I think you're on mute, Alistair.
Alistair, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I've unmuted myself now, Alan. Conor, according to the archaeologists at East Lothian Council, as you walk up Crookston Road, over the bridge from Edenhall Hospital, there's a big manhole structure, something maybe about 1,500 in diameter, with a manhole covering it. And according to Andy Robertson, who's the archaeologist for East Lothian Council, he says that underneath that manhole ring is part of the Pinky Burn, and it's just on Crookston Road as you turn the bend on Crookston Road.
So I very much appreciate that insight. I know Andrew, so I'll pick this conversation up tomorrow. I've been out and I've been in the fields on the opposite side on the Wallyford side, which are owned by the farmer whose name is eluding me just now. But I've been down and I opened up all of the manholes in his field, but they're all part of Scottish Water's assets. I've equally spoken to Margot, who owns all the fields on the other side, and she's given me provisional permission to do another trial hole in her field along what I understand is the ancient route into the town, which is now changed because of the evolution of time, just up above Edenhall Hospital. But I'll chase out that manhole tomorrow with Andrew Robertson, and I'll open it That might just be what I'm looking for. If so, thank you sincerely.
It's quite prominent. It sticks
Yeah.
up quite a bit out the field. You know.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you kindly.
Yvonne, can you unmute yourself? You can't hear me. Can you hear me?
On your slides, you just seem to be taking into account the larger burns, the Pinkie and the Mill Lade, but there are smaller burns that feed into the river. Are those not considered large enough to be looked at? We live up at Monkton Hall, and we have a culverted burn that starts somewhere up in the fields, and it runs under our back garden, and there's a manhole cover with steps down into it, and then it runs down through Greenfield Park, and it goes under the road, and it enters down through the old curling rink into the bend of the River Esk. Yeah.
Okay, Yvonne, thank you for the question. We're aware of said watercourse or burn, as you wish to whichever way we wish to refer to it. I guess the key thing to understand here is that, as with all parts of the approach to what we're doing, we're cascading from large to small. So there is no point pretending the flood risk to the town, and the reason that this project justifies the sort of allocation of £42 million worth of state money is because of the massive flood risk from the Firth of Forth, and to a lesser degree, or to an equivalent degree, from the River Esk. Thereafter, we have all of the other sources of flooding. Now, when Jim spoke earlier, he spoke about the opportunity to grab multiple benefits, because if we dig all of those areas up anyway, we can aspire to put things back better, and then prevent another construction crew coming along within 2, 3, or 5 years to dig it all up again to enhance your pathway. Let's try and do the two things at the same time. But in the same way, the flood protection scheme is aspiring to reduce flood risk from all sources of flooding. So firstmost, that means the major flood events, which, for clarity, no flood event has occurred in our understanding within living memory equal to the scale of the event that we're designing against. Now, Musselburgh has had a 1 in 200 year event, which last took place in 1948, but we're designing against the 1 in 200 plus an allowance for climate change, because we believe the risk is going to deteriorate as time passes. So first of all, we protect against that. But when we protect against that event, we disrupt the natural rhythm of the town's infrastructure and landscape. And so we prevent water traveling from the new dry side through to the wet side, because the separation is designed to prevent water traveling in the opposite direction. And so Jim, as he evolves the design, will be looking at all of these risks, and will in all likelihood be designing a back of defences drainage network. And that is where the opportunity comes in for us to pick up the flood risk associated with all of the smaller water courses. Secondary flooding, road gully flooding, road flooding, smaller burn flooding, etc. And that is why, within the preferred scheme, we have already pre-identified a network of pumping stations across the town, the detail of which that needs to be evolved, the connectivity of drainage networks to pumping stations, and so on and so forth. So that risk is not forgotten about. In a sense, we just haven't got to that level of detail yet. So hopefully that allays any concern you have. But equally, if you're not satisfied that we've picked that up, please raise this point with us again when we get to another consultation event, or indeed at the public exhibition when we're presenting the scheme itself. And then if we have forgotten it at that point, or missed that specific burn, then that allows an opportunity for us to sweep it up and pick it up at that point in time.
I don't think it will actually affect us. It was just the fact that if it's feeding into the Esk, it might have an impact on people further down in the town, that was all.
Indeed, and just to clarify, one of the things about delivering a flood protection scheme under the Flood Risk Management Act is that we are obligated to not increase flood risk to anybody. So that is one of the overriding remits that we're working to, and we're doing everything we can to ensure that's the case. So you know, we will be looking at this in due course, and if we need to make an intervention, we will be picking it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Alan.
Yes, please.
Alan Stevens.
Is there any work being considered
improve the seawall around the lagoons, because in many places it's spalling, rusting, the reinforcement rusting, and I think it needs some attention.
Yes. Okay. I'll take this one, Jim. Alan, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'm just going to bring up one of my slides. Bring it back up.
Yeah.
So hopefully you should be seeing the graphic that I provided earlier, which is the sort of graphic overview of the preferred scheme. So in relation to the flood protection schemes, you can clearly see the line of the black line, which is the line of the flood defences travelling down the Esk. And then this clearly identifies that we intend to tie into the existing seawall. Thereafter, the seawall is depicted as a dotted black line, which takes it across through to Morrison's Haven. And the note against it says that continued usage of the existing coastal defences, Scottish Power's Ash Lagoons seawall, is essential for flood protection. So I think, Alan, you have inadvertently hit on a very important question and point. We are aware of the importance of those defences, which, although they were put in place for commercial reasons to hold in the Ash Lagoons, are now part of the physical landscape and are acting as sea defences on that side of the town. If they were not there, if we still had a coastline as it would have existed in 1960, then from the point of tie-in at the seawall, we would almost certainly have a line of coastal defences which would be stretching all along the old coastline, which takes you along the outward side of the racecourse to the back of Leven Hall, back of West Pans, and onwards towards Preston Pans. But obviously that is not the landscape that we find ourselves faced with today. So the answer to that question is that the seawall is currently in private ownership, the ownership of a third-party stakeholder, which is currently Iberdrola, who has inherited the asset responsibilities of Scottish Power. And there is a complex negotiation ongoing between East Lothian Council and said third-party stakeholder pertaining to the Musselburgh Agreement, which was signed by the Towns Council in 1960, and which formulated the approach through which the Ash Lagoons and seawall could be built in the first place in order to facilitate the development of Cockenzie Power Station, just as the electric bridge was provided under that agreement. And it is not my place or the place of this scheme at this point to impact upon that sensitive negotiation which is ongoing by the council on your behalf. Now, I am aware of what is happening within it, so I fully understand your concern, but I equally cannot speak further about this tonight, and I hope you respect and appreciate the position that I'm in. But what I would say is that I am very clear, and we as a scheme were very clear in January 2020, when we put that point into this slide, of the importance of that seawall. And I would assume that the future owner of that seawall has a responsibility to that wall, and therefore to the encasing of what was a waste deposit, the Ash Lagoons, and also to the town that sits behind it. And only time will tell how that plays out. So I'm going to leave it at that tonight. I hope that suffices.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can somebody confirm that my slide has gone away again?
Yes,
it has, yes. Okay. Yvonne, are you coming back again?
Can I ask another question?
Could I make a point, please?
Sorry?
Yes, please.
I've had my hand up 4 times.
I appreciate that you can't tell us what the Musselburgh scheme is going to look like, but can you give us some idea as to what provision is made for actual wildlife? Because at the moment, the ducks and the swans and the geese all come onto the embankment with the young ones, and I just wondered from other schemes what provision is made for the wildlife.
Thank you, Yvonne. Jim, I'll let you take that question, but before you do, I think I saw a conflict there a minute ago of 2 people trying to come in. If I'm correct, I think I saw Roger Croft trying to come in. Roger, if that's correct, please feel free to come in with the next question after this is dealt with. Jim, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. So yeah, in terms of the environmental considerations, and I mentioned the environmental impact assessment before. So absolutely, one of the things that we have to consider is that in constructing the flood defences, what impact would we have on animals feeding or habitats and nesting, etc. So we'd have to consider that, you know, in a particular location, say that where they're able to get in and out of the river onto the river banks or onto on the coast, that we're not doing work, I guess, in every location at once, so that it gives them, you know, if we're working on one stretch of the river, we leave another section open such that they can then peacefully swim up and down another part of the river and sit on another river bank. So these are things that we need to look at in terms of the sequence of the construction, the types of equipment that we use and how much space we occupy during the construction sequence. So to a certain extent, we can anticipate that during the design process, and we can influence how a contractor might do it by selecting certain forms of construction. But it will ultimately be up to the contractor. Once we've completed the design and the design goes out to tender such that a contractor can win the project to build it, it will become their responsibility to then comply with the planning conditions and the mitigation that we've identified in the EIA to make sure that they don't unacceptably impact on the natural environment.
Thank you.
Okay, was it Roger?
Yeah,
Roger.
thank you.
Croft that was looking for a
Thank you
question.
very much, Conor and Jim, for updating us. I think many of us who are property owners have seen the significance of this recently. My insurance premium has gone up now. I live in East Side West because of SEPA updating their map. So obviously trying to move this forward to completion that is satisfactory to all parties is important. What concerns me is that decisions have been made without proper consultation by the council, which will have tremendous disturbance effects on the neighbourhood, especially the removal of the 3 bridges and replacing them with other designs. And there's been no consultation with locals about those 3 bridges, which are very important passing points. And that leads me to the point about the amenity. I haven't heard this word amenity. I've heard about active travel, yeah, but there's plenty of provision for active travel already. I use it for walking and cycling, as do many, many other people. I haven't heard anything about trying to protect the amenity of the riverside, which is important not just for those of us who own property here, but for many others who visit here. And I think that's a vital consideration that needs to be properly built into a proper consultation. Yes, I know I was a Quango chief executive, so I understand all these consultations with all these bureaucrats, but we are more important. We are the people, and we wish to be properly engaged in a consultation on these things. And we have dribs and drabs. We have things published on the front page of the Courier, but we have no ability to influence, and nor did it seem at the beginning of last year our councillors have any ability to influence things at all. Like the bridges, I've talked to Conor many times before about natural flood management. All I've heard tonight is about use of 2 reservoirs. I haven't heard about anything about proper catchment management using all of the instruments that the Scottish Government has, for instance, through the forestry strategy, through the agri-environment programmes. And I'm not asking you to answer all these points now. I'm just saying, when do we get not just another exhibition, but proper public consultation with all of us who care about these things?
Conor, I know you probably you're on mute at the moment, but if I can just answer first, and I'm sure you probably want to follow on. Roger, thanks very much for the question. I wholeheartedly agree with you. You know, that consultation is probably one of the cornerstones, and to a certain extent is always there, but doesn't get mentioned as much as it should. It's absolutely one of the key aspects to carrying forward the design, because while Conor is a local himself, I'm not a local, so it's not my scheme at the end of the day, it's the scheme of all the people that I'm looking at on my screen just now. It's Roger's, and it's Morag's, and it's Jeff's, and it's Alistair's. So it's up to you to tell designers and engineers like myself what type of scheme you need and what's of the greatest benefit to you, which is why we're engaging with people like yourselves tonight at the Conservation Society. We're engaging with the Fisher Row Harbour and Seafront Association. We've engaged with the Community Council. And over the past year, we've obviously been in a difficult position where we would have liked to have met people on an individual basis and knocked doors and talked to people in their front living rooms and perhaps had a different approach to consultation. But you're absolutely right. We do need to do more consultation. It's easy for us to talk virtually to statutory stakeholders from a business point of view. But equally, in order to have a meaningful consultation and be able to talk about what's best for the people of the town, we have to first understand what's possible for the people of the town. So I guess from an engineering point of view, we've focused on data collection over the past 12 months to give us the confidence so that we can understand what is deliverable and what is achievable within the realms of the environmental constraints, the engineering constraints, the cost constraints, all of the other different factors. And now that we have that data, we can have these conversations with people like yourself, with the understanding of when you ask us, can you deliver this particular type of amenity within the project, we're actually able to say with a more informed point of view, yes, that's realistic, or no, we've now gathered data which says that for one reason or another, it's not achievable. But you're right, we do need to engage more now with the members of the public, but we're only able to do that now that we have significant levels of data to inform those conversations. Conor, do you want to build on that?
I will, thank you, Jim. Roger, I'm going to simultaneously agree with you and disagree with you on two different points. I'm going to first take up where I disagree with you. And so I understand that there's frustration that the council and therefore the town's councillors did not get a decision on this. And I took that point head on within my presentation tonight. And I equally highlighted that the project team were not happy with it in the first instance. And we made arrangements within the council so that that did not happen again and will not happen again. And I now have clear instruction to go back to council the next time decision is required. However, in relation to the assertion that we have not undertaken consultation, I'm going to challenge you on that. In February 2019, we held a call for information in the Brunton over 2 days, and we spent 2 solid days communicating and engaging with hundreds of people who came in, some of whom took photographs unscrewed from their walls to bring in information to me so we could understand their understanding of flood risk to the town. We then developed a flood risk and a set of options, which we brought to the town in July 2019, and which again, we engaged with the town and hundreds of people over 2 days. Now, it's possible to say that that wasn't proper consultation, but instead of dealing with what was or wasn't, what I'm going to say and demonstrate to you tonight how those engagements changed the way the scheme evolved. So what I can tell you is that when we went to that public exhibition, the options that we were proposing did not include reservoirs and debris traps within the preferred scheme. But further to that consultation, we heard what the town said to us. We considered all of the comments that came to us, and we continued evolving the preferred scheme through the autumn, such that it was only at the back end of the option appraisal process that we included the reservoirs and the debris trap into the preferred scheme, which then got taken forward to Cabinet for approval. And whether you like it or not, Cabinet is a form of the council, and the council is representation of the people. One of the things that struck me earlier tonight when Jim was delivering his slides was the fact that he was providing you with detail in relation to the reservoirs and the debris traps, and not equivalent detail pertaining to the town. So it struck me that somebody on the call might ask me why that was. And again, in a sense, the answer to that links into what I have just said, which is the following. because those details were added at a very late stage of the option appraisal process, the technical viability of those proposals was not as evolved as many of the other options contained within the scheme. So it was only after the preferred scheme was approved that Jim and Jacobs got the opportunity of undertaking a more detailed concept stage investigation of whether those options were viable or not. And it was that additional detail which we have only latterly dropped into place that Jim was presenting an update on you with tonight, because pertaining to all other options, we had that level of detail when we went to the public exhibition number 1 in July 2020. So what else I'll refer to here is in relation to other events. Now, we had a major presentation to the Community Council in February 2020. And as I was leaving that event in February 2020, I clearly highlighted that come March, April of 2020, we intended to call and convene local area working groups at Goose Green, Edinburgh Road, and Esk sides in the town. And that was our intention. That was what was reported in the papers, and that's what we were moving to do. We managed to engage with Fisher Harbour and Seafront Association in early March at their yacht club, and it became obvious that night that the association did not represent the public in that area. So immediately after that meeting, we agreed to add Fisher Row Promenade as another area group that we were going to engage with. Unfortunately, those local area meetings did not take place in March, April, or May of 2020 because of COVID, and they have not yet happened. Now, we were at the Community Council meeting 2 weeks ago. We were with Fisher Harbour and Seafront Association last night. And again tonight, I'm going to repeat what we said at each of those meetings. We are looking for local support. We wish to reconvene those forums. We want to talk to those communities, but we can't do it by calling a meeting and inviting people to a public hall. So instead, we have to figure out an ability to route people into virtual forums like this, which is difficult. And yes, we will be putting out letters once we're ready to do them. But equally, if anybody on this call is in any of those areas, Goose Green, Edinburgh Road, which basically means between the harbour and the Runstein Burn, the Esk sides, and we're grouping them all together above the electric bridge, East Side East, East Side West, and finally the Fisher Row Promenade and Mountjoy Terrace areas, then we would be delighted if you could contact us and assist us in convening those groups, because we need to hold them and we need to deliver on the very thing that Roger is asking us to deliver, and we're acutely aware of this, but have been unable to so do because of the COVID pandemic. So please, if anyone can help, if you could just send a communication through to Gregor Moody. Gregor is on the call tonight, and for those who know the project team, I just want to clarify, Nadia Ottman has left the project team. Nadia has been replaced by Gregor Moody, who is assistant project manager, managing the project with me, and Gregor has been collecting equivalent contacts, which we're terming local champions, from those 2 other events which took place in the last fortnight, and we'd be delighted to add more names to those lists if you'd like to contact us in the next few days. Roger, in relation to the essence of what you said about consultation, just as Jim did, I fundamentally agree with you. We need to consult, but we know this, and hopefully to the back end of that conversation, I've clearly highlighted that we agree with you and that we are trying to, and we are going to figure out how to take this forward.
Well, thank you very much. That's extremely reassuring. I mean, most of us have been doing consultations of all sorts for the last 15 months anyway, using this sort of technology. So it's not beyond us to be able to begin to use this sort of mechanism at any rate, Conor. And it's done quite successfully in very large dispersed organizations. All I'm saying is that some things have decided which many of us may not be happy with, but the water seems to be, so to speak, under the bridge. And I'm not challenging you. It's not your fault. You've explained quite clearly what you had to do in being the consultants to the council. But it is of concern that some fundamental decisions were made in January last year, the papers were available later on the council's website, but we, as our own elected representatives weren't involved in that, it makes life very difficult for us all. And I think it's really important that also we get our own elected representatives much more involved in the public consultations here so that they hear our views. I mean, last point, I accept entirely that you have taken on board points that you and I have discussed about the catchment. I'd still like to hear a little bit more, but I don't want to take up time this evening about what are the other possibilities in the catchment, which SEPA should be leading on anyway as the catchment authority. But thank you both very much.
Thank you,
Noted, Roger. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? No, I think we've talked on for quite a long time. So thank you very much, Conor and Jim, for a very comprehensive talk on the current state of the scheme, and also for taking the time to speak to us tonight, because I know that you're all very busy catching up with the problems that the scheme brings up, not to mention the ones that have come up this evening. Thank you too for answering the questions fully and indicating in some way what work would require to be done. Thank you again, and could you all please unmute if you're not unmuted and give them a round of applause for their wonderful evening's presentation.